Matthew, the 6th chapter, is really one where Jesus sits down and says the Pharisees are all wrong. The others are all, the Gentiles, they're all wrong. For they have a powerless God, and you do not. I tried to think of ways to communicate that this morning. Tried to think of ways to convince you have a powerful God. And the way I chose to do that this morning is by means of a letter. I didn't intend to read it to a Sunday morning congregation, partly because of the time it would take. So I used it on a Wednesday night. There was about 35 or 40 in that Wednesday night. Said this morning, I was telling somebody 10 people came up and told me I ought to read that on Sunday morning, but it was more than that. I bet half of the group came up and simply said as individuals, you ought to read that on Sunday morning. It's an anonymous letter that we received with the congregation. The fellow who is sitting, matter of fact, he's even sitting in this first hour worship service this morning. He wrote a letter that I think is the epitome of what he believes about his God from Matthew the 6th chapter. And I guess the point I'm reading all of this for is because I want to ask whether or not you believe your God has any power. If you do not believe that, then it is worthless for you to pray and worthless for you to give. But if you can say amen to the things this fellow will say in his letter, and if you can sit down and go, I believe my God's alive, do not affect your prayers that you're giving. This testimony was written, I think, probably the day following the testimonies that were given here on Sunday morning by giving. I don't know that for sure, but I received it about the end of that next week. I'd like you to bear with me as I read you the heart and soul of one of the fellows who sits beside you this morning. It begins to a wonderful Christian family. This time 3 years ago, a wife of 10 years came home from a so-called business trip to announce that she wanted a divorce. After several days of turmoil and a few sessions with a counselor, I moved out for a temporary separation. That was 24 days before Christmas. Just the week before, I'd quit my job. It seemed I couldn't leave my problems at home when I came to work. So after 2.5 years there, I just quit. The month of December 1984, I was unemployed, but I still found ways to buy Christmas presents for a wife, mother-in-law, and a precious little daughter who's 5 years old. That year, things were tight. Things were tense. There were no presents that year for me. But there were Christmas presents that year from another man. It hurt so very much, and I didn't want to believe this could be happening to me. And my 5-year-old didn't understand it either. In January, I found a job at a fast food restaurant. I was now living in a little one-bedroom apartment on Main Street and had to pay bills. The fast food job was all that came up, and I remember crying and begging God, don't make me take this job. There was nothing else. So I donned my paper hat, Colonel Sanders tie, and I started learning the fried chicken business. In January, I came forward in church for prayer. I just wanted someone to help me believe there was still hope. I'd never prayed so much or cried out to God so hard, or from so much pain. I had become, through no choice of my own, totally dependent upon God for every aspect of my life. A helpless, scared, and lost little child, looking to a kind and loving Father to hold me through a storm that surrounded me like a shroud. I remember laying on my face on the floor, sobbing and begging God, just help me. I don't want this, Lord. February the 6th, a quick divorce was final. I didn't even go to the court. I wanted no part of it. That day, flowers were sent to my now ex-wife with a card that read, To New Beginnings. I saw them when I picked up some of my things, and besides, my little girl told me, Mama got some flowers today. The man who had sent the Christmas presents had stayed overnight on a weekend visit, had taken my wife on a ski trip, and now taken my little girl to the zoo in St. Louis. He was now talking about new beginnings, while my life was just ending. I'm writing about giving. So why all this about a divorce and a painful time in my life? I have to set the stage for one of the greatest gifts I've ever been given. Let me go on. I had placed my membership at College Heights just 2 months or so before all this started happening. Randy and Rick didn't know me very well. I was a new member in a very large congregation. Even so, they spent many hours talking and comforting me. They counseled me, prayed with me, and became my source of encouragement. I had a hard time accepting the situation as God's plan for my life, but they had me read things like the story of Joseph. And at the time I resented that. I didn't want to be another Joseph. I just wanted my family back. On February the 28th, it had all the pain my heart could stand. I also had had a very stressful and emotional day. I was recovered, or should I say recovering, alcoholic, with 16 days to go before celebrating 3 years of continuous sobriety. And AA, that's called your third birthday. I didn't care anymore. I made a decision that evening to go ahead with something I had been thinking about a lot during the last 3 months. To end the pain, to give up, to throw in the towel, to just go ahead and kill myself. I went out that evening and I bought a garden hose and some duct tape and 2 bottles of wine. I wrote a suicide note and decided to call Randy and tell him what I was about to do. Like most suicidals, I wanted to be found soon after my death. We talked for a long time, but it didn't really matter what Randy said. I made up my mind to do what I was going to do. I drove out to a secluded church parking lot, not College Heights, by the way, taped the hose to my exhaust pipe. I put the other end in my side window and turned on the motor. I looked at the wine for a long time and thought about the 3 years I'd been sober, and I thought about a lot of things. But at that time, on that night, death was the choice that I had selected as my best option in the pain I was feeling. I opened the first bottle of wine and took a drink. It still tasted the same after all that time. I remember thinking I don't really like the taste of this stuff, but it was the feeling that it gave me that I was after, not the taste. I just wanted to pass out and not have to ever wake up again. I don't know for sure what Randy was doing that very moment, but I would probably be right if I said he was praying for me. All I know is that at some point during all this craziness, the stupid hose melted and fell off the end of the exhaust pipe. I got out and looked it over, fiddled with it, tried to rework it, but finally decided this won't work. I'll have to get a heavier hose and do this tomorrow night. I went home, finished off the wine, had a few hours of drunken relief. I called some friends in that state and told them what I had done and was going to do the same thing no matter what. The next day they came and loved me and cared for me. They took me to a treatment center in Springfield. I was an alcoholic who not only had a relapse but was suicidal and needed some professional help. When I talked to Randy that morning and told him where I was going and what was happening, how I worried about my apartment, and how being gone for 28 days was probably going to ruin me financially. You see, I pictured myself coming back and having to live at Souls Harbor Mission, and I was just making enough to make ends meet anyway now, and I'd be without a job. With no prior notice, I said goodbye to the chicken business during noon rush hour, and I was off to Springfield. 2 weeks after I checked in there, my ex-wife married the guy who'd sent her the flowers. I needed a break in all this turmoil. I needed a rest. I needed to sort my life out, and I needed a new beginning myself. I had at this point turned my entire life, lock, stock, and future over to God. I'd made a mess of things. My only hope was God to intervene. I needed Him to straighten it out. I had always given when the collection plate had come around, but I never made a real commitment to God in my giving until that prior November, during commitment month. I had pledged $25 per week that month. Needless to say, I had not, under the circumstances, been able to keep my commitment. I have gone through an old check register, and I see from the entries that I gave $25 during December, even while I was unemployed. I gave $40 during January and $50 during February. That's $185, short of my pledge. But in looking at that amount I had to work with, I was making an honest effort. I knew God had promised to meet my needs if I put Him first. Up to this point He had. But what about now? The situation was bleak. I'd be coming home with no job, and all my bills would be due at once. I had just spent a month with no income and had nothing coming in. I made a fool of myself with Randy and getting drunk and trying to kill myself. Who would want to help this crazy man with all the problems? After all, I've been trouble to everybody ever since I started coming to this church, I thought. I'll just have to take care of myself. When I got home, it was a Saturday. I can't remember if I even went to church that first Sunday back. I felt a lot of shame. If I did go, I didn't see any entry in the check register of an offering that day unless it was cash. My check balance was $2.23. Maybe I didn't think God expected me to give anything that day. I don't know. Monday, April 1st. Something symbolic there. I went to the bank to try and get a loan to pay my bills. It was humiliating to be turned down. I was worried now about losing my apartment and anything else I had. I thought, but I didn't have any answer. I prayed about it and gave Randy a call. How could I ask for help again? Tuesday I called and asked Randy if he knew anyone in the congregation who would be willing to co-sign a small loan so I could pay my bills. And that way I thought I'll have the pride in knowing it wasn't a handout, just a loan, a co-signed loan that would not be money in everyone's pocket. When I called, Randy asked me to make a list of what bills were due and to total it up and call him back. I did and called him back with the totals. He said that while they were waiting on my call, he'd already gotten the okay to bring me a check. I was surprised and so relieved at the same time. All along I thought this was going to be a loan. Rick Bushnell brought the check over. Came and gave me $560.32. I started explaining how I was going to pay it back as soon as I got on my feet, and he stopped me. Rick then said something I'll remember and has meant more to me than you'll ever know. He said, the church doesn't loan money. That was a gift from them to me. And this was strictly between me and God. How I paid that back was up to me. But it was between me and God. I felt at that moment this was really God answering my prayers and taking care of my needs as He had promised to. I was so relieved to have this burden lifted. And the idea that God was the one who did it felt so good. That next Sunday, I had $38.26 in my checking account. I had paid my bills, and $5 of it went back to God. During the first month back, I had the idea to go into business of my own. In the first 3 weeks, I looked for clients for my business. I had to ask 2 sets of friends to loan me $100 apiece for food and gas. I had to have this thing off the ground by the end of the month, or I'd be in the same situation I had faced at the beginning of the month. I had this idea that God would open the doors and provide the opportunity if I did the footwork and I trusted in Him. It was on the 8th day back when a letter arrived telling me that my now ex-wife and her new husband and my little girl had now moved to New Mexico. Somehow I made it through that piece of news without falling to pieces. It was the 21st day now, and I still didn't have a client, just some prospects that looked promising. I looked at my check register that Sunday, and I saw I had only $8.54 left. I knew God would come through if I believed and trusted in Him. I put $3 in the plate that Sunday, and it really was a sacrifice that week. And I was worried that after wasting my time with this business, my own idea. After all, one of those friends who loaned me $100 said that I should maybe think about looking for a real job. I remember that feeling 2 days later when I got my first client and a check for $450 right up front. I drove home that day shouting thank you to God with tears streaming down my face. I knew God had led me in the right direction. He really was going to take care of me. I had such faith that day. The Bible was true, and God's promises came true. The faith I came to believe in that day has changed my life. It was 40 days later I was able to buy a home. The friends had been paid back and with interest. And I started making payments back to God in various ways, including the church benevolence fund. It's always fun to do things nice for someone else now and tell them this is just between you and God. I had asked for so little and God had given me so much. It's almost 3 years later now, and I've been blessed with a new wife and family. My relationship with my daughter has been wonderful considering the distance that separates us. My business has continued to grow, and today I'm doing better than ever before in my life. I'm building a new life with some new ideas. Well, those ideas have been around for hundreds of years, but they're new in my life. I am and always will remain as dependent upon God as ever. No matter how successful God may ever allow me to become, it's from His hand that I receive all these things. On my own and left to my own thinking, I made a mess of my life. But with God as my partner in all things, I can succeed and become a productive, giving person. I had to learn to receive from God before I could ever learn to give to God. If not for the giving of those who were before me, I may have been living on the streets or at Souls Harbor. It was through the love and generosity of others that I learned gratitude and faith. I came to believe in God's promises through this church and its ministers. I truly am blessed to have been a part of the College Heights Christian Church these last 3 years. Last year, I was able to make a sacrificial commitment to stay with it all year long. I've enjoyed blessings both materially and spiritually as a result. I have lost nothing and have gained so very much. This year, I'm looking forward to making another commitment, and I'm looking forward to the rewards that are in store for 1988. In the AA, they say, the only way you can keep what you have is to continue to give it away. That's so true. I feel sorry for those of you who will never know the joy of giving because of the fear of losing. You see, you can't lose what you never had.